And welcome to another exciting and insightful edition of Enterprise Chat. I feel I'm like really super elated to be here once again. Thank you all for joining. This is where we do all the talking around business, entrepreneurship, and what have you. Yes, we're delving into the conversation right now. We understand that sustainable business growth is a challenge for all businesses, but perhaps no more so than for small businesses. Now, running a business, especially a small one, isn't for the faint-hearted. You would agree with me because successful small business owners must be able to mitigate risk, seize opportunities, and deliver a product or service that meets consumer demand and expectations to grow. Now, the good news is that these challenges can be more adeptly tackled with effective small business performance management techniques. And that brings us to our focus for today. We're looking at managing and improving employee performance as a small business. Now, joining me on the conversation now is Emmanuel Abegunde. He's the head of human resources at Pedabo Professional Services. Good morning. Great to have you on the conversation.
Hi, Haramide. Good morning, and thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So Pedabo, you're the HR person. You're the head of human resources at Pedabo Professional Services. What do you do basically? What's Pedabo all about?
Okay, so thank you, Haramide, and
You're
thanks once
welcome.
again for having me. Pedabo Professional Services is an accounting firm. We like to call it Nigeria's Big Four accounting firm, right? So we know the Big Four, the KPMG, the Deloitte, the EY, and PwC, right? So Pedabo is a local accounting firm. Started in Nigeria about 25 years ago, and
Okay.
has grown big. We now have presence in other parts of West Africa and
All
East
right.
Africa. And what we do basically is to provide strategic financial advisory in terms of audit, tax, management consulting, and financial advisory services to clients. Yeah, so
Okay.
basically that is what we do.
You're really representing Pedabo well, like right now. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
having that response. Really. So let's get into the conversation for today. Now,
Mm-hmm.
really, we're looking at performance management, managing and improving employee performance as a small business. One might be wondering what exactly is performance management and why is it important for small businesses?
Okay. Thank you. Performance management is very important, but before I discuss the importance of performance management, it's good that we define it because there have been a lot of misconceptions around this business term, right? So, performance management is something I could define as the continuous process of planning, right? Monitoring and measuring business performance. So you can look at it from the business angle, you can look at it from the employee's angle. So you can substitute business performance for employee performance. But first and foremost, it is about the business. So the continuous process of planning, monitoring, and measuring either business performance or employee performance against set goals. Technically, that is what performance management is all about. And performance management is very important because that is the business process that helps us, first and foremost, to set our goals, to identify our goals, set those goals, cascade those goals to the responsible business units and responsible persons within units, right? Measure those goals to see how well those goals are being achieved over time, right? And then at the end of the day, it also helps us to identify areas of development. So performance management is not complete without areas of development being identified. And for a business that is set to make profit or deliver stakeholder value, it is important that we check how well are we meeting our strategic objectives? How well are we meeting our strategic goals? How well are we close to hitting our targets? And that is what performance management helps us to achieve.
I'm going to ask you now, because I mean, you mentioned a very key factor, which is identifying areas of development. How do you go about
Yeah.
that?
Okay, so for every performance cycle, when you have set certain goals, financial and non-financial goals, and you have measured to what extent those goals have been achieved, where there are areas of gaps. For instance, if our target, right, financial target, for instance, now is to make $100 million for a specified period of time. And when we are measuring our goal, maybe at the end of at the end of the given period, we saw that we have only achieved 70 million. There is a gap of 30 million. What were the things that caused the gap? Okay, those are areas of development that we may need to look at. Is it a skill gap in terms of employees? Is it the fact that we have, we didn't set the right goals? Right, that is something totally different. But when we are looking at skills gap in terms of employees, so maybe sales or business development teams have particular gaps in closing sales or in identifying leads, right? Those become, right, areas of development, areas where improvements are required. If it is the fact that we are not able to satisfy our customers, say our customer satisfaction rate is low, then client management could then be an area of gap that we need to close. So that is technically how to identify
Okay,
gaps
thank you.
and areas of
Thank
development.
you so much. You mentioned three key points in your definition of, I mean, performance management: planning, monitoring, and measuring. Now, all of these
Yeah.
definitely come with challenges. I want you to share what are some of the challenges that small businesses face when it comes to, managing employee performance, or say performance management, so to speak.
Okay, thank you. There are quite a lot of challenges that businesses face managing performance, and uh, suffice to say that they are not limited to small businesses alone. Some medium scale enterprises and even some large organizations may have such challenges. Okay. One of such challenges is the fact that there is a disconnect, right, between the corporate strategy, corporate values, and performance expectation, or the performance management as a whole. When your performance management system is not in alignment with your strategic goals and it's not in alignment with your core values, there would be problem implementing an integrated performance management system. So that is one. Another thing is skill gap in terms of the people that are managing performance, so to say. So if your managers are not trained to manage performance, if leaders don't have the requisite skill in performance management, there could be issues relating to performance management. Thirdly, is the case of us looking at performance management from just the measurement perspective. Now, you said that, you emphasized what I said when I said it is planning, monitoring, and
Measuring.
measuring. For many organizations, they only focus on the measurements, which is performance appraisal, throwing away the other part of planning, of monitoring, and even developing. Remember, I said there must be development, right? So if we focus our attention on just measuring performance, which is performance appraisal, without looking at the planning bits, without looking at the monitoring bits, without looking at the development bits, that could potentially cause a major challenge in performance management. So this and a whole lot of other things, actually. I think one other thing is choosing the wrong performance management tool. So if you don't have the right tool, for instance, I know a lot of organizations and a lot of people struggle with deploying and using balance scorecard, for instance. And I believe we'll get there during the course of the conversation to tell you what a balance scorecard is. Balance scorecard is a strategic tool that is also used for performance management. Um, that looks at organization performance from four perspectives: the financial perspective, the customer perspective, the process perspective, then the growth perspective. It could be cumbersome to manage sometimes. And if you don't understand how to use that tool, you may get your entire management process wrong. So choosing the wrong tool for performance management vis-a-vis appraisal could potentially also cause issues for organizations in managing performance.
I particularly like how you have really broken down, these terms and you have explicitly explained it because for me, I would have thought of performance management basically from the angle of, measuring. I probably wouldn't have even reasoned planning and monitoring. And I think I must say that's really amazing. You've given me more insights there. Now, that brings me to my next questions. How can small businesses create a culture of, continuous improvement to help employees grow and develop? Well, of course, I understand performance management is not just about the employees alone. You've also spoken about the financial perspectives.
Business, yeah.
Exactly. How can small businesses create a culture of continuous improvement to help employees grow and develop?
Okay, thank you. Funnily enough, I've done a few culture transformation projects,
Wow,
and I
amazing.
must say that before we start talking about building a culture of performance, a culture of this, a culture of that, number one thing is that the leadership of the organization must be ready to inculcate that culture.
Mm.
I have said it again and again that culture is not artifacts. Now, what do I mean by artifacts? Your symbols, your colors, the things you printed and hung on the wall of your office, that is just a show. That is just communicating what you said your culture is, right? But what your culture really is the behavior that we see from both the management and the employees in an organization. Okay, so that is the first thing. So let us get our behavior right. Let us have it in mind that we want a performance driven culture and we should be ready to give it all it takes. So the leadership of the organization should be ready to give it all it takes to have a performance-driven culture. That is one. So a mindset shift is important. That is one. After we have agreed that we are building a culture that values performance, then we should also know that within the framework of that culture is development, which means performance should not be punitive, right? It should be developmental based. What I've seen in many small organizations is that when they do the so-called appraiser, right? They just some managers, right, who have been looking for opportunities to, deal with certain people within their team, just wait for that appraiser period,
So that
and
they
then
can
they
show you
bring
shade.
exactly, you get it right. Um, for some other people, they are focusing on what the employees have not done or did not achieve. And
Mm.
that is just what they are focusing on. They don't look at what the employee did achieve. That is one. They don't look at areas of improvement and development where they can help the employee grow and develop. For us to actually build a performance driven culture, then we should give that opportunity for people to improve, for people to develop. So for us to build that culture, leadership development, performance improvement have to be ingrained in our system. After all of those are put in place, then we need to start with planning. How, what are the goals of the organization? And how you will know from that culture perspective is if you ask the front desk officer, that's okay. What are our goals for this year? What are the objectives of the organization for the next 12 months or for the next 3 years? The front desk officer must be able to tell you. The most junior person within the hierarchy of the organization must understand the strategic direction of that organization. When that is not done, we cannot say we have a performance-driven culture.
Mm.
Because what I've also seen is that the business owners, so to say, understand where they want to go. but it is not communicated to everybody within the system. And that way, you cannot categorically say that everybody is in line. I like what the Bible says. It says, write the vision and make it plain. If you don't write it and make it plain, then we can't run by it. Okay, so the goals and the objectives have to be communicated. After that, it has to be cascaded. The finance team must understand their role in achieving the goal. The people team must understand what they have to do in achieving the goal. The business development team, the operations team, everyone, every function must understand what they need to do. And every individual within the organization needs to understand what they need to do to achieve the goal of that organization. And that is why we set KPIs, key performance indicators, to help everyone understand that, okay, this is your job description. These are the metrics that we have put in place to help us understand how well you are contributing to the growth and development of this organization. Okay, so all of those things are important, and then we need to set a timeline for measurements. And finally, in building a strong culture, a strong performance-driven culture, we need to ensure that we identify developmental needs part time. It is very important.
Wow. Thank you so much for that response. Really, I think, like you said, everybody has to be involved. And one of the key points that you also mentioned is, I mean, when people think of appraisal, it's something that's when employees hear appraisal, it's something that scares them. It's not supposed to be so. You as an employee or a leader, you should be more of a constructive criticism, focus on
Feedback.
development.
Feedback.
Exactly. Rather
I
than
think I prefer
punishment,
the
like
word
you
feedback. Yeah.
mentioned the metrics that can be used. So I want to ask really now, how can small businesses measure employee performance? What are those, some, like you mentioned, the metrics that can be used? So I want to ask really now, how can small businesses measure employee performance? What are those metrics specifically that they can use? What are those effective strategies that can be adopted?
Okay, so in talking about metrics, now going back to the entire organization, because individuals' performance all sums up to organization performance. We cannot say that individuals are performing when the organization is not growing, when we are not meeting our targets, when we are not delivering our objectives. Okay, so we need to first and foremost select metrics to check the performance of the organization as a whole. And most of the time, that sits with corporate strategy. In smaller organizations, the leadership owns that, right? Um, After that has been done, then we need to put systems in place, right, to ensure that these KPIs that I spoke about, they are all
Yeah.
inclusive. Everyone is involved to ensuring that, okay, I understand my place. This is what I think I should be appraised upon. And then the managers, are in alignment with that. This is also very important because you can't just slam it on me, right? Without me agreeing whether I have the capacity to deliver that, or even that whether it is the right thing for me to do, at that particular point in time. So all of those, are important, right? Ensuring collaboration and ensuring that everybody is involved, and then um, continuous feedback is important. We don't wait till the annual appraisal period before we give feedback. So our performance management framework should be such that employees and managers have a sit down, right, to discuss their performance. It could be monthly, depending on how much time you have. It could be quarterly. It could be half yearly, but it shouldn't be once in a year. That formal sit down session needs to be put in place. And managers should also be encouraged to give continuous feedback to to their employees. And I think what I will say finally is to actually research and put in place the right tool for the business. We have several performance management tools out there. We have management by objective, we have the balance scorecard, we have the objective and key results, we have behavioral and coordinating skills. And what I have seen so far, especially by research, is that objective and key results is gaining a lot of attention in the small business enterprise, small and medium business enterprise space of recent, because it is simple to use, it is straight to the point, it is direct. So choosing that, setting, because that tool actually looks at the objectives and what are the key results that are tied to these objectives. Okay. In simple terms, that is what that tool does. So choosing the right tool is important. Now, I remember they also asked for key metrics that a business can put in place. Yeah.
Okay.
Metrics are dependent on the goals of the organization. And goals change over time, objectives change. I mean, I remembered most organizations, sort of us set targets in 2019 against 2020, right? And then COVID hit us. Then what we thought was important became less important, and everything that we were concerned about is the going concern of the business. How do we ensure that we keep afloat to be able to see through that period and come out of it? So goals should be flexible, right? And the metrics should be aligned to those goals. So I will not be able to give you metrics, for instance, off the top of my head, because metrics should be aligned to the goals of the business. If, for instance, not every organization will have financial targets, for instance. If we are not for profit, we don't need a financial target, right? If I look at a government ministry that doesn't have anything to do with money as it were, why do they need financial perspective on their as a metric, right? To measure how well that department is performing. So it depends on what is important to them and what they have set as a goal they wanted to achieve. That will determine the metric to use to evaluate that business.
I think you've done quite a whole lot of explanation and giving so much details today. But before we wrap up the show, I don't know if there's any other thing you want to say to wrap up the conversation.
Yeah. So I would just encourage business owners. I know the ease of doing business in Nigeria is not fun. I was reading a research paper, I think last weekend, and I saw that Nigeria ranked 131 out of 190 countries surveyed in terms of ease of doing business. But in all of this, we should also understand that the business that has the right people wins in the marketplace. The businesses that have whose people have the right motivation will most likely deliver stakeholder value more than the businesses that don't. There are a lot of McKinsey insights to back my claims up. Okay, so we should put people at the center of what we are doing, and we should be focused on people development. It is very important. So performance appraisals should identify areas of development, and we should invest a lot in development. And again, development is not only about classroom training. There is a 70-20-10 model for development. 70% is on the job. How have you designed your job description? Is it engaging enough? Could people learn? Help people learn on the job, right? Do you have a competency framework in place? They are improving along those competency lines, right? Then the next thing is the 20%, yeah, which is mostly coaching and mentorship. Do you have an effective mentorship system within your organization? And 10% is just classroom learning. So The most effective form of development is on the job, while we have 20%, which you can use for your leadership development and succession plan, being 20%. The remaining 10% is classroom, and you can leverage on a lot of online tools for your classroom learning. So let your business be development focused, and you will do well.
I think you've even kind of said my final lines. I mean, let your business be development focused. Thank you so much for your time on the conversation today. It was really insightful, and I enjoyed this edition of Enterprise Chat. Thank you so much, Emmanuel Abegunde, Head of Human Resources at Pedabo Professional Services. Thank you once again for your time on the conversation.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, we come to the end of Enterprise Chat today. Don't forget, we talked about managing and improving employee performance as a small business. This is where we draw the curtains. Well, of course, my name is Aranimi. Don't forget, you can connect with us on our social media platform on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at MSME Africa. Until we see you next time, goodbye.